I'm Rachel Monroe, 29. And last month, I watched my little sister collapse at my engagement party because I trusted a feeling I couldn't explain. The wine glass in my hand had a smell. That's how it started. It wasn't strong, nothing anyone else would have noticed probably, but something was off. Not corked, not sour, medicinal, almost like cough syrup laced with something sharper, something that didn't belong. My mother, Victoria, had handed it to me personally. "To your future," she said with that polished southern smile she's mastered. Her eyes never matched the smile. They never have. I smiled back, but everything in me screamed no. I didn't even think. As my sister Emily turned to talk to her husband, I made the switch. My red for her champagne. We clinked glasses a second later, and I sipped hers instead. She, unknowingly, sipped mine. Within 30 minutes, she couldn't stand up. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who else is up right now, watching the stars or curled up with headphones in the dark. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our house in Charlotte looked like something out of a Southern living spread. Wide porch navy shutters lawn, trimmed like it was cut with tweezers. From the street, we were idyllic. But inside, everything revolved around one person, Victoria Monroe. My mother. She controlled everything: where the couch sat, what shade of white the plates were, what colleges we toured, how often we said thank you. My father, Charles, a tax attorney, with a gentle face and a vanishing spine, mostly nodded along and went upstairs to work when things got tense. And they got tense a lot. Perfection wasn't a suggestion in our house. It was law. I once got grounded for a smudgy thank you note I'd written to her bridge friend. I was 12. At church, she was luminous. Kind to strangers, quick with a casserole. But at home, kindness had conditions. I got good grades because anything less wasn't safe. I wore my hair in a low bun because big curls make a statement you can't cash. I stopped taking photos at 16 when she told me real careers didn't come with cameras. "You can be whoever you want," she said, "but do it under this roof and do it correctly." That meant button-downs, ballet flats, and silence when something felt wrong. The night of the party, when the wine hit my nose, I recognized the scent before I could name it. Danger. Not in the glass. In the history. That's the part no one tells you. Sometimes the gut feeling isn't about what's in your hand. It's about every moment before it. Every shiver that went ignored. Every sigh that meant don't. So when Emily's face turned pale and her voice slurred, and she whispered, "I feel weird," I knew what was happening. Not what drug, not how. But I knew something I'd been swallowing for years was finally trying to claw its way to the surface. Our house had rules, but they weren't written. That was the trick. Victoria never yelled, rarely cursed. She didn't need to. Her disapproval was sharp enough to bruise skin. It showed up in glances that felt like x-rays in compliments with serrated edges. "Emily's hair looks so polished when it's straightened. You should try that sometime. Rachel, your teacher said your paper was interesting." Did she mean creative or confusing? It wasn't abuse the way people picture it. There were no slamming doors, no broken plates. Just this tight, invisible net of expectations that left no room for air. I lived in that net for 18 years. Charles, my father, wasn't cruel, just absent in the way that counts. He mowed the lawn, filed taxes, made pancakes on Saturdays, but he never once told my mother to stop. Not when she made me change 3 times before church. Not when she deleted my college essay because it sounded too angry. And definitely not when I cried after being told I wasn't photogenic enough for yearbook pictures. His silence became part of the script. But outsiders saw a perfect tableau. Family holiday cards where we wore matching flannel. Fundraisers where my mom chaired every committee. Teachers who praised our close-knit family. No one saw the way my fingers trembled when I showed her my SAT score. A 1470. One missed question on the math section. She looked at me with a raised brow and said, "Almost." And always, there was Emily. She was 3 years younger and 3 times shinier in my mother's eyes. Emily could do no wrong. When she forgot to RSVP to a wedding, it was an honest mistake. When I forgot, it was a reflection of how you manage your priorities. Once at 13, I spilled nail polish remover on the vanity counter. Mom cried, "I give you everything and you don't respect it." 3 months later, Emily dented the Lexus backing out of the garage, and Mom said, "At least she's learning to drive." It wasn't Emily's fault, not then. She didn't even notice the pattern. Or maybe she did. But who wants to see themselves as the golden child when it means your sister is the sacrifice? We drifted apart. Not from fights, but from imbalance. We stopped being sisters who shared secrets and became satellites orbiting the same cold sun. And I learned to shrink, to survive. I brought home awards but never showed them off. I changed in the school bathroom if my outfit wasn't mother-approved. I dated guys I didn't even like because Mom thought their dads were the right kind of men. I wasn't me. I was a series of costumes versions of myself that made her proud enough to keep the peace. When people say your childhood shapes you, they rarely mean the bruises you can't see. But they matter. They grow legs. They walk with you into adulthood. And they're the reason that the smell of that wine didn't just seem wrong, it screamed like an old alarm buried deep. The kind you don't even remember setting until it goes off. I used to think the hardest part of growing up with a narcissistic parent was the criticism. But over time, I realized it was the comparison, the constant simmering suggestion that someone right in your house, was doing it better. Emily was the benchmark I could never reach. At school events, she was the one Mom bragged about. Emily's team made state playoffs, she'd beam. If I won a photography contest, it was met with a polite, "That's nice, dear," and a quick pivot back to Emily's latest bake sale success. I don't remember the exact moment I gave up trying to compete. It was more like erosion, a slow, silent wearing down, until one day I just stopped sharing. Emily, to her credit, wasn't smug, just oblivious, or maybe willfully blind. I'd tell her how Mom criticized my hair or my job, and she'd say things like, "She doesn't mean it like that," or "She just wants what's best for you." She thought I was exaggerating, dramatic, emotional. Until that night at the Magnolia Club, Emily had arrived in a sapphire blue dress, classic, tasteful, Victoria-approved. Her blonde hair framed her face in perfect waves. Her husband, Caleb, trailed behind her like a loyal Labrador. "You look amazing," I told her, and meant it. I didn't hate Emily. I hated how different our experiences had been with the same mother. "You too," she said, tilting her head. "But isn't that the dress Mom said washed you out?" There it was. The quiet jab, probably unintentional, but still it landed. I smiled and took a sip of champagne. Not the wine, not yet. Later, during the toasts, I watched as my mother played hostess like she was born for it. To Rachel and Drew, she announced, lifting her glass, "We are thrilled for this next chapter in your lives, and thrilled to welcome Drew into the Monroe legacy." Legacy. That word hung in the air like a warning. When she handed me the wine, I saw it again, that smile with too many teeth, too little warmth. "Red for you," she said. "You never could handle champagne." A lie. I've never once complained about champagne. She invented that detail, curated it like everything else. Emily, beside me, barely noticed when I slipped my glass into her hand and took hers in exchange. She laughed at something Caleb whispered and raised her glass when everyone else did. "To the future," Mom said. "To the future," we echoed. And then, the future started to crumble. It began with Emily's laugh slurring at the edges. Then she stumbled into Caleb, blinking like she couldn't focus. "Are you okay?" I asked. She waved a hand. "Just dizzy." But her eyes, glassy, unfocused, scared, said something else. Within minutes, her body went limp. Caleb caught her under the arms, panic rising in his voice. "She's burning up," he said. Someone called 911. Someone else asked if she'd eaten. I just stood there, wine glass trembling in my hand, the scent still clinging to the rim. That's when it hit me. I didn't save Emily. I just escaped being her. And now she was paying for a danger I was supposed to absorb. I didn't plan to escape Charlotte. I just needed air. When I got into UCLA, I didn't even ask permission, I announced it. At dinner, while passing the bread. Victoria nearly choked on her wine. "California," she said, blinking, like I'd told her I'd enlisted in a circus. "Isn't that a bit far?" Exactly the point. 4 years in Los Angeles gave me a taste of freedom I hadn't known existed. I let my curls grow back, started wearing the bright lipstick she said made me look cheap, and studied journalism like it might be my salvation. And it was. Words gave me power. Photos gave me proof. I couldn't always speak what I felt, but I could show it. After graduation, I landed a job with a digital outlet in Austin. Fast-moving, a little messy, and completely unlike home. The city fit me like my mother's pearls never did, and that's where I met Drew. It was stupid, really. He spilled coffee on my laptop at a bookstore cafe. I was furious. He bought me a new one the next day, delivered with an apology note written on a napkin and a boxed set of my favorite true crime docuseries. I'm a man of solutions, he said. Also, very bad at balancing coffee. He was warm in a way I didn't trust at first. Generous without agenda. He didn't flinch when I got quiet during phone calls from home. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. When he proposed at Ladybird Lake with a vintage emerald ring, not a diamond, my breath caught in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. I called home that night. Charles congratulated us and asked about ring size logistics. Victoria said emeralds are unconventional. I suppose you've always been creative. It was her version of a slap. Still, when she offered to host an engagement party in Charlotte, I hesitated. Not because I didn't expect chaos, but because some part of me still craved approval. If we keep it small, I said, already regretting the compromise. Of course, Rachel, she replied. Something tasteful, just family. 2 weeks later, she texted me a 5-tier cake design. The guest list was 78 names long. Drew, ever patient, said, we don't have to go through with it. But I was tired of running. Tired of letting her control me by default. I wanted to walk into her world, not to belong, but to see it clearly. Maybe I thought showing up with the life I'd built would be enough to finally shift something. I never expected her to try and take it all away. I didn't know that stepping back into Charlotte wouldn't just be a return. It would be a reckoning. I should have known better. But the child in me still wanted a mother, not the woman who curated my outfits like magazine spreads. Not the woman who dictated my laugh volume at dinner. I wanted a mother who would look at Drew and say, he loves you, you're safe. Instead, I got red wine that smelled like medicine. The Magnolia Club was Charlotte's crown jewel polished floors, chandelier, light warm as honey tables, lined with white orchids and hand calligraphed place cards. The kind of place where nothing was out of place, nothing ever could be. Which of course made it perfect for Victoria Monroe. I hadn't been back in that room since a junior cotillion banquet when I was 17. That night, I tripped during a group dance, and she didn't speak to me the whole car ride home. Just tapped her French-tipped nails against the steering wheel like a metronome of shame. Now here I was, again, older, independent, engaged. But the same tight feeling had returned in my chest. Drew squeezed my hand when we stepped into the room. This is extravagant. That's Southern code for you could buy a house for this, I whispered. He chuckled, but his grip tightened. There were no twinkle lights or backyard candles like I'd imagined. No playlist of our favorite songs. Just a string quartet and rows of faces I didn't recognize. Who are these people? Drew asked, scanning the room. I spotted the mayor's wife near the dessert table and shook my head. People Mom wants to impress. Madison and Lila, 2 friends from Austin, waved from a corner. Their sequined dresses looked out of place next to the sea of taupe and navy. When we hugged, Madison whispered, she hasn't stopped staring since we walked in. Victoria, Lila nodded. She asked if we were your artsy friends. Of course she had. I saw her before she reached me, tall, graceful, immaculate, in an ivory sheath dress. The color was 1 shade off from mine. Not an accident. Rachel, she cooed, kissing both cheeks. You're 30 minutes late. Traffic, I said. Flight delays. She waved a hand, already pivoting. Come. I want you to meet the Coopers. Their son works in finance. Very well connected. Drew's jaw tensed. I shook my head. Maybe later. Her smile stiffened, but she didn't push. Not yet. The evening unfolded like a pageant. I was trotted from group to group, congratulated by strangers who knew nothing about me. Victoria micromanaged everything. At one point, she pulled me aside to adjust the neckline of my dress. You don't want to look cheap in photos. I nearly walked out then. Drew caught my eye from across the room. A silent, you, okay? I wasn't, but I nodded. Emily arrived fashionably late, in a dress that matched the centerpieces. Her hair was curled makeup perfect. Mom lit up like a chandelier. You look stunning, she said, pulling her close. This color is made for you. Then to me, Rachel, maybe you'll let Emily help you pick your outfit for the wedding. Emily flushed. Mom? But Victoria had already moved on. Later, she announced a family toast. Waiters emerged with flutes of champagne and one glass of deep red wine. This is for Rachel, she said. Champagne gives her headaches. Another lie. But I smiled, took the wine, and switched it with Emily's flute when no one was watching. Just in case. 10 minutes later, Emily was pale. 12, she was staggering. 14, she collapsed. When Emily started swaying, I thought maybe she hadn't eaten. She wasn't a big drinker, never had been. One glass usually made her flushed and giggly, not this. Not hollow-eyed and murmuring nonsense under her breath. Breathe, I said, touching her arm. Her skin was clammy. Caleb appeared instantly, one hand on her back, the other gripping her elbow. She's not okay, he said. Emily tried to speak, but the words slurred together like a melting record. Her eyes rolled, legs buckling. Caleb caught her just before she hit the floor. Gasps swept the room. Someone call 911. My heart punched against my ribs. I turned to the glass she had been holding. The red wine that should have been mine. Everything moved fast and slow at the same time. Waiters scrambling, guests murmuring. My mother pushing through the crowd like a swan parting water. What happened? She asked, tone perfectly pitched. She's sick, I said. She needs help now. Victoria knelt next to Emily, brushing hair from her forehead. Her expression was all concern, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not panic, not even confusion. Expectation, like she was waiting for something else. She only had one glass of wine, Caleb said. And some water, maybe a bite of cake. One glass, my glass. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My fingers tingled. That smell, sharp, synthetic, unmistakable. I remembered it again. Not just from the glass, but from the time Victoria made me tea during a migraine in high school. I drank half of it and passed out for 12 hours. She'd said it was herbal, strong but effective. But now I wasn't so sure. Paramedics arrived. They knelt beside Emily, took her vitals, shone a light in her eyes. She's responsive, but impaired, one said. Could be a reaction, could be something she ingested. What did she have? The wine. The words sat in my throat like broken glass. Mom turned to me. Rachel, you look pale. Maybe you should sit down. Drew appeared beside me, jaw locked. What was in the wine? She blinked. Excuse me. The red wine. Why did you bring a separate glass just for Rachel? It's a vintage she likes, Mom said, voice breezy. I thought it'd be a nice touch. It smelled off, I said quietly. Medicinal. Mom's smile didn't budge. Darling, you're overwrought. The paramedics lifted Emily onto the stretcher. She moaned softly, eyes fluttering. I'm going with her, Caleb said, climbing into the ambulance. I'll follow in the car, Charles offered, ghost pale. And Mom. She hesitated, then looked at me and Drew. I'll ride along too. Someone should be with her. She's still so young. She touched my arm. Stay here. Finish the party. I'll call with updates. Finish the party. Like Emily collapsing in a heap was just a hiccup in the program. Drew leaned close. You don't believe this is an accident, do you? I didn't answer, because believing it wasn't meant facing something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. The idea that maybe, just maybe, my mother had meant to hurt me, and instead she'd hurt Emily. Charlotte Memorial's emergency waiting room was a sea of beige chairs and bad coffee. I sat with Drew in silence, his hand wrapped around mine like an anchor. My body was there, but my mind was somewhere else, back in that ballroom, back at the moment I switched the glasses. Emily could have died. Not from alcohol. The doctor was clear. It wasn't wine that did this. It was what was in it. Family of Emily Monroe, a nurse called. We all stood, me, Caleb, Charles, and Victoria. The nurse gestured to a doctor who approached, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She's stable, the doctor began. But her talk screen came back with elevated levels of lorazepam, an anti-anxiety sedative, and another compound we're still analyzing. Not something she'd take recreationally. It's a high dose. Caleb shook his head. She hasn't taken anything. She didn't even want Tylenol last week for a headache. So it was deliberate I asked, though I already knew the answer. We can't say for sure yet, the officer replied. But we are treating this as a potential case of poisoning. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. My daughter was poisoned. The performance was convincing. Her voice wobbled. Her eyes glistened. But I was watching too closely now. I saw the tiny twitch in her temple, the way she glanced at me sideways, waiting for my reaction. One of the officers stepped forward. "We'd like to take brief statements. Just basic questions for now." We all agreed. When it was my turn, I told them the truth. The strange smell, the glass swap, my past experiences. I hesitated before saying it, but Drew nudged me gently, grounding me. "I believe my mother intended for me to drink that wine," I said. "I think Emily was collateral damage." The room fell silent. The officer's expression hardened. "We'll need to check all possible sources of the wine," he said. And if permitted, her personal belongings. Victoria was sitting by the window, clutching her designer purse in her lap like it was a pet. When the officer asked to see it, her expression froze. "Is that necessary?" "Yes," he said simply. She opened it with reluctant fingers. The officer put on gloves and began sorting its contents: wallet, lipstick, hand sanitizer, a phone, and a small leather-bound planner. "What's that?" I asked before I could stop myself. He flipped it open, pages of tight cursive writing, notes, appointments, and something else. A list. Names, doses, side effects. "Ma'am," he said to Victoria, "we're going to keep this. You have no right. It may be evidence." He bagged it carefully, ignoring her protests. When he stepped away, I caught a glimpse of one page. Just one. "Rachel continues her rebellion. If she goes through with the wedding, it will destroy everything I've built. Drew is weakening her. If the party doesn't work, I'll need stronger intervention. Emily is compliant. Caleb is loyal. Charles remains useless." It was there. The truth I'd always felt humming beneath the surface. Proof that the love I fought so hard to earn had always been conditional, calculated, and that my mother had crossed a line she could never uncross. When we entered Emily's hospital room, the beep of the monitors was steady, rhythmic. Caleb sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers like a lifeline. Her face was pale, lips dry, an IV dripping into her arm. She turned her head slowly as we walked in. Her voice was groggy but clear. "What happened?" I pulled a chair close. "You got sick, Em. The doctors said it was something in your system, something not normal." Her brow furrowed. "The wine." I nodded. I switched our glasses. She stared at me, silent. Understanding washing over her in waves. She didn't need more than that. Then the door opened. Victoria! Still composed, still regal, still acting like the room belonged to her. "Allison," she said softly, using Emily's full name like a magic spell. "You're awake, thank God." She moved to the side of the bed, brushing Emily's hair off her forehead. Emily flinched. Victoria's hand froze in midair. "Don't," Emily said. Her voice was thin, but it sliced like a scalpel. Victoria blinked. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." "No, it's not," I said, rising from my chair. "They found your diary." Her lips parted slightly. "That's private. Not when it details how you plan to drug me." "I never wrote that," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. It was a therapeutic exercise. My therapist said to write my thoughts unfiltered. "You don't have a therapist," I snapped. "I was considering one," she said, eyes darting to Charles, who had just stepped into the room behind her. He looked tired, wrinkled, defeated. "She knows, Victoria," he said gently. "They all know." And something cracked. A seam split open. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she said, her voice shaking now, hands wringing. I just needed her to pause, to reflect, to reconsider. "By drugging me," I asked. "It wasn't meant to be dangerous," she insisted. "Just enough to make you rest, to cancel the after-party, to think about what you're giving up." My stomach turned. "What after-party?" She paused. That was her mistake. I hadn't told her about the after-party. "You read my texts," I whispered. She said nothing. "You went through my phone." Still silence. Emily shifted in her bed, her face twisted in disbelief. "You drugged me, Mom." "I didn't mean to." It was Rachel's glass. "You just admitted it," I said. "Stop twisting my words," she hissed. "You said it was supposed to be me," Emily said softly, tears now in her voice. "You said it like that made it better." Victoria turned to Charles. Tell them I was just trying to protect the family." Charles finally stood straight. "No, Victoria, you were trying to protect control." "You're all so ungrateful," she whispered. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed my life for you girls." "You demanded ours in return," I said. She lunged at me, then not violently, more like desperately, hands reaching for my arms. "You need me. You don't know what you're doing." Drew stepped in. She knows exactly what she's doing. The door burst open. Two detectives entered with the hospital's security staff. Mrs. Monroe, one of them said, "We need to speak with you in private. Now." Victoria's face collapsed, not into remorse, but into fury. "This isn't over," she said as they guided her toward the door. "You're making a terrible mistake." I looked at Emily. "No, you did." After she was escorted out of the hospital, the silence in the room was dense. Not just quiet heavy, the kind that presses on your chest like humidity before a storm. Emily turned to me. "Did you know she was that far gone?" I looked down at my hands. "No, but I knew something wasn't right for a long time. I just didn't want to believe she'd ever actually do something." Emily wiped her eyes. "I thought you were being dramatic. When you said she was manipulative, I thought you were just angry." "I was angry," I said, but not wrong. That was the turning point for us. The distance forged by years of comparisons and unspoken resentment didn't disappear in a flash, but in that moment it cracked. A sisterhood long dormant began to resurface. Caleb brought coffee. Charles returned with paperwork. Drew kept holding my hand like it was the one thing in the world he was sure of. By the following week, Victoria was formally charged with attempted poisoning. Her attorney leaned hard on a diminished capacity defense. Psychiatric evaluation confirmed it narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid delusions worsened by untreated anxiety. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. Charles met me at a coffee shop one afternoon, thinner than I remembered, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit his frame. He stirred his drink like he was afraid of the silence. "I'm filing for divorce," he said without looking up. I nodded. "I think that's the right thing." "I should have stopped her," he said, "years ago. I kept telling myself she'd settle down, that things would pass. But they never did. I just got better at ignoring it. Until she drugged your daughter," I said. He winced. "Yeah, that was a wake-up call I couldn't hit snooze on." He asked for my help apartment, hunting a few weeks later. That day, standing in IKEA, watching him try to decide between two identical nightstands, something inside me softened. We weren't healed, but maybe we were healing. As for Emily, she changed too. She started going to therapy. She stopped deferring to Mom's version of reality, and she started calling me every Sunday. At first, the calls were hesitant, awkward, then longer, then natural. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said once. "You were always fighting a battle I didn't know existed." I smiled. "Now you do." And Drew, he became my oxygen. He gave me space when I needed it, and structure when I crumbled. One night, sitting on our porch in Austin, I turned to him and said, "Let's change the wedding plans." "No chandeliers," he teased. "No chandeliers. No ballroom. No curated guest list. Just us. Just love." We downsized everything. 40 guests tops. Outdoor ceremony by the lake. My curls free, no veil. Emily as my maid of honor. Madison and Lila beaming in mismatched dresses. And Charles walked me down the aisle. Not the man who disappeared into paperwork for 2 decades. The man who finally showed up when it counted. Before we said our vows, he whispered, "You built this life with no blueprint, kid. I'm proud of you." And for the first time in my adult life, I believed it. The sky over Lady Bird Lake was streaked with that kind of sunset you can't fake, burnt orange, lilac, soft gold. We stood under a simple wooden arch draped in eucalyptus and linen. It smelled like summer and second chances. This was the wedding I dreamed of before I knew I'd have to fight for it. Drew stood across from me in a navy linen suit, no tie sleeves rolled. Calm, present. The kind of man who didn't need to rescue me, just walk beside me. Always. The ceremony was short, honest, and ours. No readings about obedience or unity candles or anything my mother would have insisted on. Just vows we wrote ourselves. "I love the way you don't flinch when things get hard," Drew said. "I love that your truth is messy and unfiltered and brave. I promise to stand with you when the storm hits, not just when the skies are clear." I said, "You never asked me to be smaller, not once. You never tried to rewrite me. And because of that, I finally feel like I know who I am." There were tears, laughter, real applause, not polite golf claps from strangers in pearls, just people who knew what it had taken to get here. Emily stood at my side, bouquet in one hand, tissues in the other. Her speech at the reception began with, "I once thought I had the perfect mom, But now I realize I have an imperfect sister who is brave enough to be honest, and that's so much better. Madison and Lila danced barefoot on the grass, spinning in circles under string lights. Charles got misty-eyed during our father-daughter dance, whispering, "You broke the cycle, Rach. You did it." Victoria wasn't there. She wasn't invited. And legally, she wasn't allowed. The restraining order was still in place. Through her attorney, she'd sent a letter. I didn't read it until after the honeymoon. It was half apology, half blame. Classic her. But it didn't pierce like it used to. It was just ink on paper, no longer gospel. Our honeymoon in Portugal felt like stepping into a new skin. No one knew us. No expectations. I took photos every day. Drew made me laugh every night. We talked about kids, not just if, but how we'd raise them. What we'd do differently. What we'd keep. We'll give them room to breathe, I said. And we'll always believe them when they say something doesn't feel right. When we returned to Austin, the world felt brighter, like some veil had been lifted. I pitched a story to a major outlet, an essay about emotional abuse in high-achieving families. They published it. The response was overwhelming. Comments, emails, DMs. People saying, "You put into words what I've never been able to say." I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building. Emily and I FaceTimed every weekend. Charles joined a book club. Drew and Caleb became unlikely friends bonded over beer brisket and protecting Monroe women from generational nonsense. And me, I sleep better now. Not because everything's fixed, but because the worst already happened and I came out not just standing, but walking forward. My voice is mine, my life is mine. The wine glass didn't define me. Trusting myself did. So that was my story the night everything changed, and how I built something better in its wake. Maybe you've had a moment like that. Maybe your gut spoke to you, and you didn't know whether to listen. Maybe you were raised by someone who made you question everything, even your own instincts. If any of that feels familiar, I see you. Have you ever had to make a painful choice to protect your peace? Has your intuition ever saved you, maybe without anyone ever knowing? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries. Even with family, especially with family. You are not selfish for wanting peace. You are not broken for needing space. You are allowed to be free.